Hi teachers, my name is Sarah Smith. Welcome to Lead to Teach and welcome to part 2 of Correct Me If I'm Wrong. We're finally going to talk about what happens if your non-vocal and vocal corrections are not enough to shape your students' behavior to be more appropriate. Then what do you do? What's your next option? We're going to get into that today. I'm super excited for it. You can download guided notes at leadtoteach.com as always, if you'd like to. Otherwise, let's talk about the why of correcting. I want to first describe for you one of the hardest students I ever had. This is cute Gage, and Gage is a kiddo who was transferred into my first grade classroom on only the 10th day of school. And the reason he transferred into my classroom is because he had been kicked out of his previous school for aggressive and defiant behavior. And if you're thinking, wait, you can kick kids out of school? No. But because the school he had been attending was a school choice option for him and his family, they had said, you know what, you're going to have to go back to your assigned boundary school, which happened to be my school, which happened to be my classroom. And the reason I say Gage was such a hard kiddo is because he did the opposite of everything I asked him to do. If I said yes, he said no. If I said up, he said down. If I said go, he said stop. and everything was a battle. Everything was difficult. And I think how important it was to have corrected his behavior that year and to have gotten it under control and gotten it managed so that he didn't disrupt everyone in my classroom's learning and his own learning, right? And his own success and his own happiness. So we finally did get to a point where his behavior was really well managed and where he was really successful and where he and I had a great relationship, but it took a lot of effort. But again, think how important it was to make that effort. What if I hadn't done that? It would have ruined that year for not only that entire class, but also for him and for me, if I'm being honest. Recall that a correction is a response meant to stop a disruptive behavior. I love starting with that definition because I think it shapes everything we think about the importance of correcting. I'm wanting to stop something that's disruptive and destructive. If I see a flame in the forest, it doesn't matter if it's just a tiny spark. I'm going to do everything I can to extinguish it because I know the risks of what it might turn into. Just like in my classroom, if I see disruptive behavior, I'm going to put a stop to it as immediately as I can because I know the risks we take, what it might turn into. So I hope you remember from last time that corrections may require non-vocal or vocal components. That's where we start, right? But we may also have to move into a redo or removal component. And I want to just note kind of quickly that there is no hierarchy between redos and removals. Which one you pick as a higher level intervention depends on the infraction of the rule, depends on the problem behavior. Today we're only going to focus on redos, but I just want to be clear that a redo is not more important than a removal. It just depends on context. So again, we're looking at once you state an expectation, it's always, always, always followed by praise. I'm always affirming what students are doing well, but I'm correcting as needed, vocal and redo removal. So we're jumping down to this redo removal portion of the correction piece of feedback. Here's what research tells us, is that students who exhibit high levels of inappropriate behavior and low levels of socially acceptable behavior are likely to experience school failure and peer rejection, which is heartbreaking, isn't it? But I like that the inverse is also true, that students who exhibit high levels of appropriate behavior are likely to experience school success and peer acceptance. So we can turn the tables if we know how to do it. Thus, here's what research continues telling us, one of the most helpful strategies a teacher can employ is to swiftly respond to disruptions before they escalate to more severe problem behaviors. I mentioned the domino metaphor. I don't want to let the first domino fall and watch it just keep going around my classroom. As soon as I see that it's toppling, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent it from continuing right then. Do you remember too, we've said that whether you are perceived as Miss Honey or Professor Umbridge is going to depend very much on your approach. It's not that the correction in and of itself is inherently bad or wrong. It's just that how you use it is going to determine how students, parents, administrators, other teachers perceive you. Okay, so let's talk about the how of correcting using redos. We're just talking about redos today. And I've already said there is no hierarchy between the two. Okay, a redo is defined as requiring that students perform a behavior again. Are you shocked? No. In my mind, this is a lot like what we do academically all the time. I was in a second grade classroom a couple of years ago where the kids were doing doubles facts, and this little boy came to a problem that said 8 plus 8, and he looked up at me and he had started to solve the problem, and then he looked up at me and he said, 12? Of course, I'm not going to say, uh-oh, do we need to call your parents? Or maybe I should have you go talk to the principal. Or, no, that is not right. That is not okay, right? I'm not even going to fall into scolding. I'm just going to require that he try it again. Oh, it's not 12. Try it again and see if he can come to the correct answer. We can require redos individually or as a group, depending on the situation. So let me give you an example. Individually, let's suppose that Max walks into the classroom and he's karate chopping. Hi-ya, yeah, wah, wah. Okay, and I use that example because I've seen it. It happened to me. A correction would look like, oh, Max, go back out and walk in quietly this time. And I'm going to have him go back out and try that the way I need it to be done so that that behavior doesn't persist and escalate. And then as soon as he does that, what am I saying? Oh, thank you. That's much better, right? And I'm building the relationship again. Let's suppose, as a whole group example, that the class takes out their whiteboards noisily. The correction might look like, oh, my class, we're going to try that again with mouths closed this time. Put your whiteboards away. And I'm waiting for everyone to put them away before I say, this time we're going to, and I describe how I want it to look and how I want it to sound. Or in this case, maybe just how I want it to sound because the infraction was that it was noisy, right? Okay, here's what I want to talk about are the top 5 redo must-haves. In order for a redo to be successful, to be effective, what does it have to look like? Because I see teachers use redos all the time, and for one reason or another, the redo falls flat. So these are top 5 components that must be in place if you want your redo to land. And we're going to talk first about just for the whole class. Let's suppose there have been 4 or more students who engaged in some form of problem behavior, and now we need to do a redo. Okay, so setting up the scenario, let's say that the teacher has already used tempo to set the expectation for lining up. Let's suppose it's not a problem of the teacher not being clear about the expectation. But students are initially quiet, and then a small group, maybe 4 or 5 kids, start talking as they are lining up. Well, the first thing you want to do is require the redo as immediately as possible. And this probably doesn't surprise you. If you remember, we talked about corrections in order to be effective have to be given with a 0-second delay, right? Between when the infraction occurs or when the expectation is stated and when the infraction occurs. So the second one, let's suppose that the teacher excuses the students to line up. Okay, everyone, you're going to push in your chairs and line up by the door for PE. Do it in 10, 9, and then let's suppose 4 or more students start talking to each other. By second 5, immediately after I notice that those students are talking, I'm going to stop the class. Pause, pause, pause. And I'm going to return to the point at which the disruption began. I'm going to start that process over by saying something like, I need everyone to go right back to their seats. We're going back to our seats. And I'm waiting for them to get back to the point at which the disruption began before I do my next step, which is to explicitly restate the expected behavior. And remember that I'm using a really direct, no-nonsense, matter-of-fact tone as I do that. And I'm going to tell them exactly what I want them to do differently. So it might look something like, this time, when we line up, I expect everyone to go quietly. This means your mouth stays closed. It means if someone starts talking to you, you put your finger to your lips and you stay quiet. Show me your quiet mouth. Okay, so will you just notice how many times were the students told that they needed to have a quiet mouth there? Can we count it? I expect everyone to go quietly. It means your mouth stays closed. It means if someone is talking to you, you put your finger to your lips, but you stay quiet. And then even a check for understanding, show me your quiet mouth. So when I say explicitly restate the expected behavior, that's what I'm talking about, is that you get really clear and really specific about what you are looking for. Let me give you a quick tip herein, is that tone will make or break your effectiveness faster than anything. What I mean by tone is how you say it. So sometimes teachers are sort of encouraging in their tone, and they say something like, I know we can do this, guys. I know we can line up quietly. And that would be one reason a redo isn't effective. Sometimes teachers are a little bit apologetic and they act like it's their fault that the students have to redo the behavior. I'm sorry, but we have to try it again. I wish we didn't have to, but that's what's going to happen. Nope, you're the authority figure in the classroom. You're not sorry that it has to happen again. It's just something that needs to happen again. And sometimes teachers fall into a threatening approach and say something like, well, it's your recess you're cutting into, so keep it up. Go for it. Talk all you want. All of these three approaches are going to be less effective and are not going to result in compliance, because what we should be doing is being direct, authoritative, and matter of fact. Another quick tip is that rate will also make or break your effectiveness. Let me tell you a real life example. The reason I'm using lineup as an example is because I saw this kind of recently in a classroom where a kindergarten teacher said to the kids, and I'm going to try to do it as rapidly as she did. She said, okay, let me pause though and say she had sent them back to their seats, right? And she had made sure 100% of eyeballs were on her so that she could begin telling them what the expectation was. She was on this third step of explicitly restating the behavior. So up until now, it has looked beautiful. But then this was her rate. This time, when we line up, I expect everyone to go quietly, which means your mouth stays closed. And if someone starts talking to you, you put your finger to your lips and you stay quiet. Ready, go. Guess what? Not a single thing changed. They still lined up as noisily as they had before. And in my mind, it was simply because they hadn't had processing time. They didn't really know exactly what she was expecting of them because they hadn't been given time to process and think about it. And it didn't convey seriousness on her part to have gone that quickly. It didn't seem like she really meant it when she said it that quickly. So notice this time how we can use the same language, but just by pausing, it increases the effectiveness of the direction. This time, when we line up, I expect everyone to go quietly. This means that your mouth stays closed. And if someone starts talking to you, you put your finger to your lips, but you stay quiet. Show me your quiet mouth. Yep, that's what I'm looking for. Ready, go. And I would guess that regardless of your student dynamic, that's going to be a much more effective redo. You've set them up for much greater success because you gave them processing time and you conveyed how serious you were about the expectation just by your rate. Okay, number 4 is, okay, let me back up. Let's make sure we know where we're at right now. So we've already had kids go back to the starting point, right? And we've already restated our expectation. Now what we want to do is we want to give feedback as soon as students start moving again. As soon as they start redoing this behavior, I'm going to start giving always affirmative feedback and then corrective as needed. So Kate, yep, that's much better. Anna, that's perfect. Carson, close your mouth. We're not talking. And then the 5th one is that I'm going to state my future expectation of the behavior. From now on, that's what I expect every time we line up. Every time we line up, your mouth should be that quiet. And I do that so that I don't have to continue redoing the behavior every time we go to transition or meet an expectation. So we're not going to say, see, I knew you guys could do it. That was great. Nope, I'm still being direct and matter of fact about, yeah, that's how it looks in our classroom to perform XYZ. Okay, so in this video, what I'm hoping you can notice is how all the steps of a redo, except for one, are implemented during this transition as the kids are required as a group to redo a behavior. 1st grade.
If you have your fruit snack package, I want you to pick it up. Just like Todd, I want you to hold your water bottle in the other hand. Oh, turn. Oh, 1st graders, sit back down. Look at my face. Just like that, Jacob. This time, when I ask you to stand up, I want you to do it without talking. Will you be able to talk a little later? Yeah. But right now, no. Show me how your mouth should look. Nope, I didn't tell you yet. Your directions are to stand up without talking. Just like that, Ashlyn. Yep. You're not in a line. You're just going to follow me all the way out the door. Layla, perfect. Miriam, perfect. Danny and Todd in the back, perfect. Gabe, we're just going quietly.
Okay, so did you notice which step was not implemented? And it was stating that future expectation of behavior, but I think the most important part, if I had to say what the most important part was, is that explicit restating of what the behavior should look like instead. And because that was done successfully, my guess is that it's not going to be so detrimental that that step was skipped, although typically we wouldn't want to skip it. Okay, so a question teachers ask is, so at what point do I require a redo? And there's really two rules of thumb. After an expectation has just been stated, if I have just said we're going to line up quietly and kids start talking, no, then we're going to redo it. Or after a vocal correction has just been given. If I have just given a vocal correction and kids continue not meeting the expectation, then I require a redo. Those are the two rules of thumb. The reason I have consider Tate in parentheses here is because Tate was a kiddo who demonstrated this in my classroom at one point. So I had told the kids to quietly take out their math manipulative box, and all the kids were doing it quickly and quietly except for Tate. Tate started talking, and I said, "Oh, Tate, our mouth is closed." And he looked at me for a sec and was quiet for a second, but then he started talking again. Well, I've just given a vocal correction, so now I'm going to have him redo the behavior. Tate, nope, put it away. We're pulling it out quietly this time. And I jump right into a redo because the correction wasn't enough. Teachers sometimes say, well, what if I can't do an immediate redo? What if we're lining up from recess because we have to get inside for reading groups and I've got all the aides or parents or support in my classroom. I can't be late to those, so I can't do an immediate redo. Well, then you would want to do it at the next available time prior to accessing a privilege. So before my kids go to recess the next time, we're going to practice lining up quickly and quietly. And them having that next recess is going to be contingent upon them showing me that they can line up quickly and quietly. Let's suppose you're lining up for a fire drill and your kids are being super noisy and super rowdy. Probably you can't afford to do a redo right then, right? Because you've got to get out of the building, especially if it's not just a drill. But before my kids go to PE that day, or before we have our recess, or before we even do a read aloud, right? Something that the kids enjoy, something that's a privilege, we're going to practice redoing that behavior. And I'm going to do it as quickly as I can in proximity to the original behavior, but I want to do it prior to accessing a privilege so that I have a contingency I can use. We can start our story as soon as I see that you know how to line up quickly and quietly for our fire drill. Okay, then another question teachers often ask is, what if only 1 to 2 students are off task? Do I still have the whole group redo the behavior? And the answer is no. You would not have to have the whole group redo the behavior if only a couple of kids are off task. What I often ask myself is, okay, was it just 1, 2, or 3 students, or was it 4 or more? If it's 4 or more-ish, then I'm going to do a group redo. But if I can identify the individual kids that engaged in the problem behavior, then I'm not going to have the whole group redo it. So let's set up the scenario that the teacher has used tempo to train lineup behavior. And same as before, students are initially quiet, but then just a few students start talking. 2 or 3 students start talking. The rest of the class is going quietly, but not these 2 or 3. Can we talk about top 5 redo must-haves for an individual when you're having an individual redo a behavior? 1 to 3 students, okay? And what I'm hoping you can find is what's the main difference between a group redo of behavior and an individual redo of behavior, because these are really similar, which is the good part, right? That's the good news. Can you find the main difference, whole group versus individual? Okay, first is that you'd want to require the redo as immediately as possible. So second 1, I excuse the students to line up. Second 4, 2 of my students start talking. The very next second, second 5, I'm going to address both students while everyone else keeps moving. Okay, now steps 2 and 3 are done together at this point. I'm going to return one of those students to a starting point while restating my expectation. And you might say, well, what if you don't know which student started the conversation? What if you don't know who started it? It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you know who started it. Excuse me. We still return one student to a starting point so that they know I'm serious about my expectations. And it doesn't matter so much who started it. So it might look like this. Oh, Jace, go back to your seat and line up quietly this time. Eli, your mouth is closed. Am I sending both of them back to their seats? Probably not, because I don't want them to kind of team up and feel like, oh, look at us. We got sent back to our seats and now we're going to continue talking as we line up together again. So I'm just sending one student back to a starting point while saying what my expectation is. Your mouth is closed and I'm still correcting the other student, even if the other student isn't redoing the behavior. And notice that everyone else keeps moving. Okay, then the next piece is that I want to give feedback according to students' compliance. You're not surprised to hear that. So as Jace does line up quietly this time, Jace, much better, thank you. While everyone else is still moving. Maybe by this time we're already out of the classroom and walking down the hall by the time he finds his spot in line. And then of course, 5th would be that you state that future expectation of behavior. And maybe I do it in the hall as we're walking, or maybe I wait until we get to the music classroom and I can talk to those two individually. But I'm going to say something like, from now on, that's what I expect every time we line up. Every time we line up, I expect your mouth to be closed. Okay? Thanks. Did you notice then what was the main difference between a whole group and an individual redo? And wasn't it that the rest of the class kept moving? While this one student is redoing the behavior, everyone else is still moving. In other words, I am preventing sabotage. I'm not going to let this one student sabotage or take over the class. I don't know if I've lost screen. So let me show you a video example of that. And I want you to notice how a single student is asked to redo the behavior while the rest of the class keeps moving. Will you just notice what that looks like?
Can I use yours, Hallie? In just a second, you're going to quietly, oh, Trevor, you're turned around this way. In just a minute, you're going to quietly pull this tub, this is called your tub, on top of your desk. Are you going to put your fingers in it and start taking things out? The answer is no. Oh, okay, put it back for just a minute. Put it all the way back for just a minute. And when I ask you to take it out, you're just going to pull it on top of your desk. And I want to see who does it quietly. Will you pull your tub on top of your desk? First one done. Awesome. Benjamin, ready? Good. Kaylee, ready? Tate, put yours back in and do it without talking. Your directions were to do it without talking. Okay. You have some things inside of your tub that are for you to use all year.
Okay, so a question teachers often ask is, but what if I can't require a redo right then? What if, for instance, we're going through our letter naming flashcards and I have a student who's really off task and disruptive and I don't want him to sabotage the entire group by having him redo it right then while everyone else just has to wait? Yeah, good point, absolutely. So the answer is the same, that you would do it at the next available time prior to accessing a privilege. Before you can go to PE with the rest of the kids, we're going to do our flashcards. And this time I expect your hands to stay on top of your desk and your eyes to watch the cards and your mouth to move as you say the sounds or the letters or whatever. Let me show you an example of this. I had a kiddo one time who got his whiteboard marker out during our phonics paper, during our phonics lesson, and began marking on the words with his whiteboard marker. And I said, oh, Jared, we're putting that away. We're doing this with pencil. And I tried just using a vocal correction. And he looks at me and he colors the little picnic basket here before he puts it away. Was that following directions the first time? No, it sure was not. So guess what? If students don't meet the expectation after a vocal correction has been given, you implement a redo. But Sarah, it doesn't seem like it was really that bad. Seriously? You're going to make him redo the whole paper just because of that? Yeah, because I'm always considering the risk of escalation. And I want him to know that I mean what I say the first time I say it. So we finished the lesson and I said to this kiddo, do you know what? I'm going to have you redo your paper. I gave him a blank one. I'm going to have you redo it, this time without using your whiteboard marker. And as soon as it's filled out and done nicely and neatly, you can meet us on the rug for the story. So prior to accessing the privilege of a read aloud, he had to redo the paper. Here's another one, is a kiddo who was not normally emotional. One day was just being really emotional and was crying and putting his head on his desk and refusing to work. And despite me telling him, Tanner, we're sitting up, we're not crying, we're writing our sentences, and knowing he was capable of doing this, because he continued to be emotional and to be non-compliant during that task, then I just waited until later in the day and I said, okay, Tanner, before you go out to recess with the rest of the kids, I'm going to have you write your sentences, but I want you to practice doing it without crying. I want you to practice doing it calmly. And you might be saying, but Sarah, like, you don't know what trauma he went through that morning. You don't know what's going on. Don't you want to find that out first before you decide if this is necessary? And the answer is, maybe I would have. Yeah, maybe it's important to know what's going on. But even if I know what's going on, I still know that in general, students' best chance for success is to succeed academically, right? Education is their best chance at being successful in society. So that might seem a little bit dramatic, but I'm still going to require that he redo it, even if I know why the trauma or the behavior or the emotional meltdown has happened. Okay, so in summary, we're going to say redos are most effective when implemented immediately, right? That 0-second delay between when an expectation is stated, when a correction is delivered, and when the infraction occurs. When redos are given with clear correction or expectation, I'm really, really explicit about what I expect. And when combined with feedback, when I say then to the student, thank you very much, that's what I expect from now on, or nope, that wasn't quite right. Let's try that even again. Okay, last question then is, what did you like or learn about correcting disruptions? And for me, it's this idea that the most effective teachers require redos behaviorally, just like they would academically. Effective teachers look at behavioral skill acquisition the same way they do academic skill acquisition. And they assume if you're not successful at meeting my expectation, it must be because we just need to practice it again. And I don't need to become upset about that, and I don't need to criticize you for that. It's something we just need to practice so that we can be successful meeting expectations. And what if a redo is not the right move? What if you need to do a removable instead? We will talk about that next time. Okay, see ya.